The Charlotte Podcast Festival is presented by Blumenthal Performing Arts, the Queen City Podcast Network, Eclecs Creative Agency, and WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the home of acclaimed podcast Charlotte Talks, She Says, The List, Amplifier, Southbound, and FAQ City. Learn more about WFAE and our latest podcast, Work It, at WFAE.org.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to tonight's activities for the Charlotte Podcast Festival. My name is Brian. I'm with the Queen City Podcast Network here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm very excited to introduce this panel and to get things started tonight to talk about adding video to the mix for your podcast. So we had a long talk about this the other day, and we're going to do our best to be both encouraging and realistic about the idea of adding video to your podcast. So I'm looking forward to this hour and introducing our panelists to you in just a few moments. As you all know by now, this is Charlotte's first podcast festival. It's presented by the good folks at WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the Queen City Podcast Network, Blumenthal Performing Arts, and Eclecs Creative Agency. This hour session is all about adding video to your podcast, and we are going to talk about it. And we are going to, again, be encouraging but realistic about the idea of adding video to the mix to your podcast. We will look forward to answering your questions. We're going to request that you leave your audio muted during the session. There will be time for Q&A at the end. We'll also take questions along the way from the chat room. So if you do have a question, a follow-up about something that's happened, go ahead, add it into the chat on the side of the screen, and make sure you also tell us where you're listening from, and give us the name of your podcast as well. But if you have a follow-up question, leave it in the chat room. As I mentioned a moment ago, this session is being recorded and will be made available over email later this month. Make sure you check your emails to receive the session recording at the end of the festival at the end of October. Make sure you check your spam and your promotions folders for these emails as well. Sometimes they get kind of tucked away in there. I want to remind everyone as well, you can check out the full list of sessions at the Charlotte Podcast Festival website, charlottepodcastfestival.com. Don't forget, if you're talking about us on social media, please say nice things and use the hashtag CLT Podcast Fest. Hashtag CLT Podcast Fest. If you like what you're doing, we want to remind you that the sessions all month long are free to attend. There's great information. All the best podcasters in Charlotte are sharing their knowledge with you. If you like what you're doing, you can go to the website, charlottepodcastfestival.com, pick up a t-shirt. It'll tell everyone, hey, you were involved in this cool thing, and it'll help maybe make this podcast festival a thing that can happen again in the future. So, it's free right now. If you like it, shell out a couple bucks for a t-shirt and show your support for the Charlotte Podcast Festival. All right, so let's introduce our panelists today. First of all, as I mentioned, my name is Brian. I'm with the Queen City Podcast Network. I spent 28 years in broadcast television. I now own my own video production company here in Charlotte, in addition to running the Queen City Podcast Network. And I'm the director of curriculum and instruction at the Carolina School of Broadcasting as well. So first up on the list, and heads up, Levin and Alexis, I'm coming your way. Everyone, this is Levin Chaskey and Alexis Jo Bruce. They run the Charlotte Star Room here in Charlotte. Hey guys, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
So we're going to find out everything that they know about on video and check out their setup. So they're kind of the hands-on part of tonight. They're going to show you what is kind of a fairly typical higher-end setup for a video podcast production. So we're looking forward to learning from Levin and Alexis. And also joining us on the panel tonight, Chuck Holliday. Hey, Chuck, how are you?
There we go. I'm good. How's everybody?
I'm excellent. Chuck is a broadcast television veteran, camera operator, television producer, and he runs Suite 929 here in Charlotte. And he's here to share his knowledge as well about starting to add video into your production. So very much looking forward to hearing what Chuck has to say as well. And guys, I want to kind of throw this out to you. I hear from a lot of people who just come to me and say, I'm thinking about adding video to my podcast. Chuck, Levin, Alexis, I know that you guys get this question as well. Let's start with you, Chuck. It's when people come to you and say, I've got a podcast, but I'm thinking of adding video. What's your response?
I think the first thing for me is that the first thing I normally ask is, are you ready for a commitment? Because it requires a commitment. Regardless of how your approach is, how many people you're going to involve behind the scenes, it's a commitment. And you have to look at it from a consumer side of you watching TV. Do you think what you have in front of you is enough to put on video and engage in your audience to upgrade or even elevate from your current audio, and do this continuously for months or weeks or whatever at a time? So I think that's your first that's the first thing I would ask somebody. It's a commitment. It's a business. It's a commitment. It is a job.
Yeah, it described kind of the additional work, right? So we know that running a podcast already can be kind of a full-time gig, right? So adding video to the mix adds, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much work does it add to the mix if your podcast is already the equivalent of a full-time job?
It adds probably, I would say probably 8 to 10. I mean, it's a lot to deal with, whether you're producing yourself, whether you bring in somebody who's more of an assistant to assist you, or do you want to get a full-fledged team in, like with that regard. Regardless of how low scale or high scale you do it, it's still a commitment, and it still requires a lot of effort and a lot of dedication, as well as just awareness in general, to make sure that that you're putting out a product that represents your brand, that the consumer is now going to watch. And you want to make sure that from that side, are you putting out something that is worth watching? And is it going to elevate what you currently already have in audio?
Right, exactly. So audio is one thing. The one thing that I always tell everyone is video complicates everything, right?
Yes.
So if you're having trouble just getting the audio the way you want it in a podcast, adding video to the mix is just going to complicate your life that much more, especially if you're not experienced with video, if you're just sort of dabbling in video. Alexis and Levin. So when people come to you and say, I've got a podcast, I'm thinking about adding video to the mix, what do you tell them?
I think along the same lines as what you guys are speaking to, exactly what are the goals, short and long term? Why do you want to do this? Are you ready for this? What's it going to add from a narrative standpoint, right? So is it value added? And then the time standpoint also. I think it's hard to, I think a lot of people underestimate how much time goes into the production, and then the editing is really the big thing. So if you're going to undertake that yourself, if you're going to be dealing with all the gear yourself, that's one thing, but then to also incorporate the editing and then stay on target with your release schedule and everything would be an important thing, because you want it to be timely, of course.
Yeah. And also if it's going to reflect your brand, right? So you want to make sure that, what you're putting out there is like how you want to be received, because it's video shows it all. So you want to make sure that it's reflecting your brand correctly.
Yeah. Now you guys have a setup there at Charlotte Star Room. It's what I would call a higher end video setup. I mean, I definitely want to take a tour a little bit later, but tell me how long, so just the setup right there, you've got 2 blue microphones, a camera or 2, the audio setup. How long did that take you to set up before tonight's, and you've got a little assistant there, looks like.
I have 4 hands.
A little hand stuck into the mix. How long did it take you to set this up for tonight's session?
That's a good question. Yeah. So earlier today, we jumped in here. We have a team of about 5 people. So a few of us jumped in here for about an hour around noon just to get everything set, and we kind of have a blueprint to how we do these things. But there's always little tweaks that you need to make every time, and something that's not quite working right that you need to check. Especially in the live standpoint, is adding a lot more logistics. But so it's an hour then, an hour just now, just kind of getting everything fine tuned.
Yeah. So a couple hours to set up.
Yes, it always looks simple, but it's a lot.
Well, and you guys were tweaking your audio. In full disclosure, you guys were tweaking your audio a couple of minutes before we went on, right? So you guys were like right up against the, well, not to narc on you or anything, but a couple minutes.
It's how it always is. It's right up to the last
pressure.
Second.
Yeah.
Yep.
I want to talk about the importance of if you're adding video, why you're adding video. So Chuck kind of mentioned this, and you guys kind of mentioned this as well. The importance of having something interesting to look at. Then I guess there's really no question there. So how you can, you can do what I'm doing with my setup with the green screen. Chuck has a plain wall behind him, and that's okay. Hey, Chuck. But if you're going to add video, you kind of need to have a reason to add the video, right? You can't just add video because you think people want to watch what you have to say. There needs to be something kind of interesting to look at to make it worthwhile, right? Yeah.
This is for us.
I'm sorry. I'm looking right at you, and wondering why you're not. I'm Levin and I'm Alexis. What you can't just add video for the sake of adding video. It's got to be compelling to look at.
Right.
Yeah, we touched on this when we had a pre-call. It's interesting because we're in this age of where the big shows are home, and you have these personality-driven shows that are just in their living room, and production quality has been lowered in that way. But it's coming from a standpoint of where people kind of know the brand and what people are doing, and they're there for the content. So I think if you're coming in, you don't have a lower bar now just because of that. I think you actually have a higher bar to prove yourself, to get your to grow your audience, to show, like you said, what you want to show with your brand, quality wise. And then there's so many little things that bother people that I think people don't notice. I think a lot of people are picky, which is great. And so bad video, you can't avoid. If it's bad, it's bad. And
it's distracting. And then you're going to lose your whole audience because,
off the top,
it's what stands out.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. Chuck, I'm coming your way. We talked a little bit in the pre-meeting about if you're adding video, is it still a podcast? Right? The purist will tell you no. If you're adding video to it, it's not still a podcast. Where do you stand on that? And does adding video bring any more listeners into the tent?
I think it works if you're gonna have a podcast, or if you already have an existing podcast that has guests regularly. If you have more than one co-host, things like that. Yeah, that's perfect. I think that's a great way to show the dynamic and chemistry between a group of people. If you have guests, that's always a great thing to have. I think that when you go beyond your 1 to 2 camera setup, one location, and things like that, that's when it becomes a TV show at this point. And I think that's when you're talking about something totally different. But really, it just really matters about whether you're going to have guests. You don't want to just have the camera sitting on you for 3 straight hours like a show like Pro Football Talk, where it's just Mike Florio and nothing else. And every now and then Chris Sims. So you want to have something that can continue to bounce around. You want to have engagement. Dan Patrick's show, I know, Brian, you mentioned that. That's a great example of a show where Dan interacts with the producers, but the producers are just as much of importance because of the dynamic of the video than Dan is himself. And you're now seeing that with the Rich Eisen show and Dale Jr. Download, things like that. I think it just really depends, but you really want to make sure that it's always good to have guests, more than 1 or 2 people on board, on air, it makes for a great dynamic to visualize versus just you.
It's a question from the chat room. Jasmine Clark says she has a primarily audio podcast, but a recorded video for a couple of guests who are comfortable with video and have YouTube channels. I've heard video drives engagement because listeners/watchers want to see facial expressions. Is it still beneficial to add video if you're using it on a guest-by-guest basis and are not consistent? Chuck, I'm going to direct that to you. Is it worth it to put up video sometimes and maybe go 3 or 4 episodes without any video?
I don't know. That's tough. That's tough because then there's no consistency. It's going to be really hard to continue to explain to your audience that this person doesn't want to appear on that person doesn't want to appear on, but this person will. I think that needs to be established well in advance. I think it's okay to go an episode here and there, maybe without, but that's a commitment. You have to have, if you're going to have 1 or 2 on, you got to continue to have everybody on, you know, even if it's in a short term where you just have maybe 5 minutes of your podcast with a guest. But I feel like you have to have your guests on. You have to have video on. At minimum, probably 80% of the time. You're going to lose your audience if not.
Yeah, I think if you start it, you know, you can't just dip your toe in it. It's kind of like your release schedule. You know, if you tell everyone, you know, I'm going to release a new podcast, audio podcast every Wednesday at noon, then you got to be there every Wednesday at noon.
Agreed.
And, you know, if you're just going to dip your toe in video and then maybe go a month or 6 weeks without having a video episode, that's not really going to help you. You've got to be consistent
Agreed.
and be there on a regular basis. Let's talk a little bit about equipment and setup. So Levin and Alexis, I'm going to come your way. So you've got this great setup at Charlotte Star Room. Can you just kind of walk us through the gear? Now, this is kind of a higher end setup. Just kind of walk us through the gear that you've got and kind of give us a ballpark number of what a setup like this is going to cost someone if it's a direction they want to go.
Absolutely. So yeah, we just set this up as a demo purpose for this. I feel it's kind of like a higher end medium. So you know, depending on your budget, you definitely can go higher, but also definitely ways to do it at a quarter of the cost as well. So what we have, you know, the basic audio has been covered fantastically by all the speakers in the first week. So we don't think we need to go into, you know, too many details, which is, you know, at this point, but this is an audio interface. You could do 4 inputs or 2. This is a 2 input one. We just have us today. Here's a Steinberg UR22. It's about $125. All of them run about, you know, under $200. And then there's a lot of great new ones coming out with more features. I think in this virtual world, they're becoming more innovative with these things. This is kind of a basic. You can adjust your gain here. We have 2 mics. We have the Bluebirds. These are about $350 each. And then we have a Sony A7R3, R4, A7R4. It's like $3,500. But you could sub that out. We have just the key to making that, whatever camera you want to put in there, you could sub this, you put the cam link here, which is like an HDMI dongle, cam link 4K. Don't get the old version. You want the 4K one. Most cameras nowadays, they do 4K. You don't need that as far as what you're putting up, but it's nice to have it on the back end for editing. You could use a GoPro for $300, you know, or under. The 7, the 8, the Black Edition, and then the 9, the new one. They all have webcam updates. You can plug them right into your USB, or you could plug a Canon, the Blackmagic sitting over here, Sony, Panasonic, mirrorless camera, and then you get the depth of field that you see here. And that's basically the setup is those elements.
So that's one camera in a cover shot. If you start getting into hot switching between multiple cameras, you know, so we could have a medium shot of Levin and a medium shot of Alexis, and then kind of start cutting around the room a little bit. And then you're talking about adding even more production value.
Right. And if you, depending upon, like if you have multiple guests and then you want the, you know, like maybe
Exactly.
4 different, you know, depending upon how many people you have.
Yeah, so so GoPro
GoPro is good
people
for
put
that.
them right with the mic. You could have 4 different GoPros,
Yeah.
1 on the host and 3 guests. Do it pretty affordably. We have a switcher that we use for our live broadcast stuff, a Blackmagic switcher. That's pretty affordable as well. And then you do the multi-camera that way, but that's going to
You're going to need help. You're going to need a team of people. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone mentioned before that, you know, you had multiple people setting up your equipment for like, you know, an hour at noon and then an hour later on in the day. So there were 3 people, so 2 hours a day. That's actually 6 person hours, you know, that it took you to set up, you know, the setup that you've got here today. So that just kind of reinforces the time commitment, but also the personnel that, you know, you need. The more advanced, you know, you get into the video realm, kind of the more people it takes to make it happen effectively.
I guess another thing too, it depends upon like your setup, right? If you have a room that you can dedicate as your podcast room, right? So then you get your setup done and you can leave it like that essentially. So it also depends about your situation. Yeah.
So someone was asking about, you know, using the video from Zoom in a recording, and we did kind of talk about this last night. And Chuck, will bring you back in the conversation on this as well. You know, we talked a little bit last night about kind of the way things are going during COVID-19, since we're all kind of locked down. We're all spending entirely too much time on sources like Zoom and other video networking tools. You know, using Zoom, it's what, you know, we have done quite a bit of that at the Queen City Podcast Network. Not yet for video, because we don't do any video podcasts yet, but we've had pretty decent success with Zoom audio. But what about using the Zoom recordings? And let's see, Chuck, we'll go to you first on this. Using the Zoom recordings as a video element for your podcast.
It can work. I think that there's so much risk that comes with a Zoom recording. Connection issues, bandwidth issues, lagging. You're basically opening yourself up for all of this. Even if it's a 10-minute Zoom, you're opening yourself up for all of this. So that's where it can get tricky. And then also too, you're looking at, you know, you may have one setup, but who's to say that your interviewee or your person that's on your other side of the Zoom doesn't have a quality setup, you know, and they're not exactly matching up with the level of setup standard that you're set up with. So now it makes for an uneven looking Zoom kind of recording. And that can, I mean, look, for some people, that's okay. But then, you know, if you're looking at, again, I'm just bringing up certain podcasts, but if you bring up something like Dale Jr. Download, you're going on there and you're expecting to see a certain level of video. Do you want this to be a representation of your brand as you're looking at this? I mean, the general public is smart. You can't throw with so many excuses out. I don't know. I don't know if that works full time. Maybe one here and there, but for a long-term solution, I don't think that works.
Levin and Alexis, what are your thoughts about incorporating Zoom into a video podcast?
Yeah, I think it depends on the logistics. Certainly agree with everything Chuck said there. All the issues that can come up. So one thing you can do is, if you can, you know, test it with your guests if they're not local. If they can record on their end and the audio is done right, then you could sync it up later, where you could record on both sides and then match it up. Of course, if it's not quite right, and then their audio is not as good as yours, you're going to notice it even more when you go to add it. So it kind of depends on the quality that you're able to set up. You know, if you have hosts, if you have guests that you really want to get on camera, then I think a little pre-production is key, I guess, planning, right? To really, because if you just jump on there and try to 5 minutes, make sure they're all set up, you're not going to have time. But you can do what we're doing here. We could record this on Zoom, you know, and you change the input, and then you could be getting better quality, but you'd still want to be recording offline, you know, on your end, and have the guest side as well recorded separately, because there's always going to be hiccups with the bandwidth.
Mm-hmm. So someone asked alternatives to Zoom. There's a site called Zencastr, Zencastr. The Zencastr initially started offering options for people to record remote audio with two people in different places. The way Zencastr works, if I'm the host, it records my audio track on my computer. Chuck, if you're the guest, it would record your audio track on your computer. And then when you finish the recording, it sends everything to a predetermined Dropbox, and then you stitch the files together. Zencastr has just added a video beta test. So you can sign up for that beta test at Zencastr. The Zencastr rate's about $15 a month. I've gotten approved for the beta test, but we've not yet had an opportunity to test it. I've been pretty happy with the way Zencastr works on audio, and I'm guessing that their video product would be pretty good as well, because they put a lot of work into it, especially now that we're locked into COVID-19 protocols. But Zencastr.com, not on the payroll there by any stretch of the imagination, but probably worth checking out if you're interested. So guys, Katie Christian says we're a bunch of Debbie Downers, that we're just that we're crapping on the idea of adding video to your podcast.
No, not at all.
I think video can be great. I mean, it really can. It's definitely a way to feel like a connection with your audience and to get people engaged.
Up level it.
It does require, it's a commitment. But I would like to say, sometimes I feel like, people take on a lot, and maybe you start even on like a smaller scale with the video, maybe doing more like social, like Instagram videos, behind the scene kind of thing to tease your podcast, which I think is great, because I see this all the time and I like it. That's what attracts me. Like, if you have a little behind the scenes clip of you and your guest, and you can do this a little informally, with the GoPro or
whatever you have,
or whatever you have to tease it. And that way you are like showing a little bit of the video, a little bit of the conversation, and then it will help people click on the link to follow up and hear the rest. And this way, and this way you're just taking video on in a little bit and not the whole scope of it. Yeah.
Without committing to, this is a video podcast, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and I think too, I don't want to discourage anyone from trying video, but you need to be aware that it's not as simple as just propping up your iPhone and hitting record. You need to be ready for what it's going to take to produce a quality podcast. And while the production values have taken a bit of a hit over COVID-19, but people still have an expectation of what they're watching, because there's been decades of broadcast television history, and so people, viewers have an expectation of what they're going to watch. They have a tolerance for video that's a little wonky, or for audio that doesn't quite sound right, and they don't care how much experience you have, or if this is your first video or whatever. If it doesn't look good, if it doesn't look right, they're not going to stay with you.
Some people do get away with it. Like if you're already a celebrity and you have your built-in fan base, they can get away with doing a lot of more like informal kind of video stuff that's not the best. But if you don't have your audience already, you don't have your fan base already, like it all goes back to your brand. You just want to make sure you're representing yourself the way that you're going to keep drawing people back in.
Yeah. That's a great point. If you think about, the podcasters and personalities who are kind of best known for this kind of thing, our Howard Stern, we mentioned Dan Patrick, we mentioned Rich Eisen, Dale Jr., John Reap up in Hickory is producing a video podcast. These are all people that people know, right? So most of us, I would think, are not necessarily household names. And so if you're not a household name, Chuck, then what can you do to make to make your video sort of more enticing for people to want to tune in to see what you have to say?
I would probably start with doing the short video clips, something where you can maybe put together maybe a 5-minute kind of clip of not giving away your whole podcast if you have an audio version, and really just kind of bringing your viewers in, but then also really moving them also towards audio. This way you can now continue to engage. This way, when you now can do a long-term video, it feels like it's a good payoff. And have guests. I think guests, if you can have somebody that's interactive, somebody that's very engaging, it doesn't matter what you guys are doing on camera, it's gonna work. But you always want to start with at least understanding that bringing guests on will just always help any podcast, any video, anything. It just makes everything just that much smoother and better. The just energy, synergy, engagement, it just all works,
Yeah, I love the idea of maybe starting out by recording a couple minutes of your podcast. Find something interesting in there that you can promote and kind of build around. You can use it on social media, on Instagram TV. You can use little video clips to push to your bigger podcast first. Get the hang of that first, and kind of crawl before you walk and walk before you run, right? So start out by kind of biting off shorter chunks of a video, using those to promote your podcast. Get used to editing. Editing is something we haven't really even talked about yet. So kind of start out in smaller pieces, and kind of build your way up towards then maybe recording your entire podcast. Levin and Alexis, we have a question about set design. So you guys are sitting in a room. You've got a step and repeat behind you, a couple microphones. Your room's very interesting to look at. Can you talk a little bit about the set design and kind of the things that you do at Star Room to make the environment visually appealing?
For sure, and definitely want to be optimistic and encouraging with everybody. Really, I mean, it's something that you should have fun with, and it depends on your goals, I think. And there's a lot of different people on here with a lot of different goals. So everyone wants to build their audience, but some people want to have fun with it. Some people want to go a more serious route. So really, it is what you make it. So I hope we're not making it too serious, because it's the barrier to entry is really low now with all the gear that's being created. So really, everyone should be encouraged to get out there and experiment for themselves. There's free software, OBS people mentioned. I'm digressing. Anyway, so sorry. So set design.
There's many things you can do, like depending upon where you're at. If you're in your house or you're going to a space, you just always want to kind of think, like look at the shot, what would make it interesting to you, like the depth of field, all that kind of stuff. Like an example I think of, like Andy Cohen. Everybody, has seen his stuff. He always he had a studio where he was doing his show, but now he's at home, and he kind of created that set behind him of still kind of having on with his brand, little figurines of things that are important to him and things that are representing kind of what he's doing. So it really depends upon your brand and what your podcast is about. Like, it's about sports. Maybe you set up some sports stuff in the back, or music, you set up your music stuff, but it's kind of like, or business. And then you have, your library in the back. You just want to think about what would be interesting to other people.
And then graphics, I think there's podcasts that do a great job of adding graphics.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you have a TV or some kind of way to present. And then it does get into more of that TV set realm, but, I think there's a way to do ways to do it, on the cheap end, that it can be just more than us sitting here. You can bring in other elements in post-production as well, for sure. Since you're not going live, you can play with the edit. You can do a lot of crazy stuff.
But then you got to get into the editing, and editing is hard.
Yeah, again, the green screen thing, and you want to do silly stuff. It's endless.
Lots of different ways you could go.
Let's kind of briefly talk about editing. So you record your entire the podcast on video. for example, you've got now an audio track and a video track. Now you have to sync them up, and then it's time, if you do any editing in your audio as well, and you're just kind of mirroring the audio production with your video, now, Chuck, you're talking about getting into audio to make sure the audio matches the video, not only for lip sync, but also for content purposes as well. And now you're adding, again, if you're not prepared, you're adding a lot more work to the mix.
It's a lot. Not only that, but then do you want to have an intro? Do you want to have a little caption that has your name on it? Little things like that. It's a lot that goes into it. Look, I'm not going to sit up here and tell anybody it's hard. It's this much, but at the same time, it's just a lot. It's tough to really explain in terms of to somebody who's still trying to figure it all out. But you really have to understand and look at yourself from the standpoint of what do you want to see, and do you want to see somebody that's speaking with the audio sync off, and the audio is 3 seconds ahead? No, I mean, it's not being, negative, but that's just, like you said earlier, it's a certain level of standards you want to see. But, you can do it. It can be done with Adobe Premiere, Corel Video Studio Pro, which is actually a great program for consumers, people who are not really as skilled in the video space, but you can still kind of throw in there the stuff and get it going. It's a lot.
To the sync point, to throw in, just a tip, Red Giant Pluralize is a lifesaver for auto syncing. I know Premiere and Final Cut have built-in features as well, but if you want to sync a bunch of different video feeds at the same time, you can dump it all in there to a program like Pluralize, and it will do it for you and save you hours.
Or also, if you want to work on building, like this is something that you want to really work on building with your brand, you also can work on building a team of people. So, because sometimes I do think it's overwhelming to take on everything by yourself. So like maybe you have other people invested in your brand and your mission, and you can find an editor to help you, or a producer, or another 1 or 2 people, and kind of like pull it together. Because editing is definitely important.
And you know what? I'm gonna piggyback off of Alexis here, and she's right. It's a lot to take on. I know for me, I've never wanted to be on air, so that's out. So, I stay behind and that's that. But for some people who want to be on air and produce, there is nothing wrong with going to find maybe somebody who's in college who's studying to be a video producer, or somebody who's studying communications, or things like that. Somebody who into or has an interest in this, who you can maybe bring in, who's still trying to establish themselves and things like that. You can do a lot. You can get a lot done with a 2-person setup, but sometimes throwing everything on yourself can be a lot. It could really be stressful, and it could really make you walk away, which you don't want to do, because you built this up. You don't want to do that. But you can always get somebody that's younger who somebody who doesn't mind taking on the duties of something like this.
Right.
That has the resources. That's a great point. To piggyback, we get so many submissions for jobs, so I know there's a lot of people that want to get in.
Yeah.
And then my first response is, because I always want to immediately be not discouraging, and that's awesome. Can you send us some of your work? And a lot of people don't really have much to show, and really you need to be able to show off a portfolio and what your style is and what you're capable of. So definitely something that's attainable, I think, even more now with just the level of base level of tech knowledge that the youngsters have.
Mm-hmm. You can always find someone who's usually willing or wanting to, have that experience and try something new themselves. So.
A couple minutes before we kind of throw things open to questions, Alexis, you said something to me last night that when we were talking about kind of the direction that we wanted this to go, and you said that you're a podcast viewer, that you like to watch podcasts. on YouTube, but then you said something interesting. You said, I like to watch podcasts on YouTube when they're done right. What did,
Right.
as a podcast viewer, what did you mean by that?
I guess visually, I always like to see a better production quality. To me, it's important. I get really distracted when things are like sloppy and not clear. So I like when things are a little interesting and like the quality is really good. But I'm definitely drawn more into watching people, because I feel invested more than just listening. So that's why I do love video as introducing video into the podcasting. I really do love it, but for me, it has to be done right. So like the background, like the set design, what we kind of talked about, having guests where like the video is good as well for them, because that's always interesting. Lighting is really important.
All about lighting.
Yeah. And that the audio is still really important. So, but it is nice when the visual is good, it's nice to be engaged that way.
There's a lot of affordable lights available now.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys mentioned lighting. There's a thing that you're doing with your step and repeat in the back that maybe no one will notice, but you've got a little blue light on the floor that's kind of shining up in the background, and it's little things like that you may not necessarily think of that just add depth and interesting elements into your background, and you wouldn't even, the average viewer is not going to notice that, but it does make a difference.
Yes, always depth is important. You never want to be sitting flat on your backdrop.
Right.
It's not interesting. Always pull away.
And you want soft lighting to key you to be the main lighting. So like even the LED is now, that's a something that was designed by a wedding photographer, and it creates a soft light, and it's just an LED. Mm-hmm. This is an ice light 2, but there's cheaper versions of that. They're about $100, and it's just one light source, but it creates a soft light. And then we also have 2 soft boxes on us. So you don't want dramatic overhead lighting. Mm-hmm. You want something that's going to give you a nice, even, no shadows look. But
they do make a lot of inexpensive light kits now that you can get on Amazon and stuff. And lighting is important. So then also maybe finding somebody, even if you have that one space, if you have somebody that specializes in lighting or something, they can help you figure it out, because there is a skill to that as well. So
yeah, and someone said, what portable lighting? So this is, you can take this off and just carry it around, for instance. So very easy.
Yeah. How far from what looks like you maybe 3 or 4 feet from that back wall? Is that, as I watch you slide back to the yeah. So to your point, Alexis, creating that depth in the background kind of softens the focus a little bit of the background, just makes the entire image a little bit more interesting to look at than being kind of pasted up against a wall.
Right. Defines you, right?
Yeah. One of the things that we talked to the students about at the school, and particularly people who are just kind of dipping their toe into podcasting or into video production for a podcast, once you start doing something like this, you really start to look at the thing that you're doing differently, right? So you are no longer the average viewer, you are no longer the average listener. You have an inside knowledge of the thing that you're working on, right? Whether it's a podcast and audio production or video production, you now kind of know how the thing is made, and so that makes you no longer the average viewer. So when you look at your own product, you're going to look at it differently. You're going to look at everybody's product. You're going to start to notice things on TV, jump cuts, continuity errors. You're going to see bad edits on TV that you never noticed before, because now you kind of know how this stuff works. Chuck, Levin, and Alexis, do you guys have any things that you do as a practice to kind of remove yourself from the project that you're working on and kind of look at it the way the average viewer would look at it? Chuck, let's start with you.
For me, I always completely cut myself away emotionally or whatever from whatever I'm producing. Because I'm looking at it from a consumer standpoint. What do I, as a viewer, when I flip on my boob tube, what I want to watch, and just the little things that I want to see. I don't want to see certain aspects, like you said, certain things that shouldn't be shown. So I look at those little bit of things that, you know, I don't know. I just try to make sure that there's this, whatever I look at on TV, I want to make sure that that's what somebody else watching looks at. And I don't want somebody to think the same thing that when I'm looking at a bad show, the first thing I'm thinking of is this, that, and the third. I want to make sure that the average person that's watching, you know, looks at it the same way. I mean, little things like I have here, like mic flags, little things. So that way you know what you're watching, little things like that. I try to make it at least presentable on the fly, but you know, I try not to really get invested in any project I work with emotionally. I treat everything as a business, no matter what, because at the end of the day, again, you want to look at a certain product, and I just know for me, when I turn on my TV, I don't want to look at something that doesn't look crazy, you know, doesn't look standard, you know.
I wish I had your ability to not get emotionally attached to a project, because, you know, like, you know, by the time you finish a project, you've seen it 50 times, 60 times, 70 times.
Yeah.
You know, so you're invested in every single thing.
Absolutely. And I think that for me, and not to say it like that, like I'm heartless, but I think for me, you know, my job is to make sure that my client or whatever show I'm working on, we're putting on the best presentation that we can put on with the resources that we have. And I want to make sure that it at least looks as presentable enough to watch as possible, no matter what the scenario is. Crafted with Cradle is one podcast that I do that, you know, we film it in the host's household, but we try to make sure that the presentation looks, it matches up with what you would normally match up, what you would normally watch, just on any YouTube blog, any YouTube podcast, whatever. I just wanted to make sure that it still looks presentable enough just for the average person to watch. I don't want anybody to look at it and say, "Oh, that's not a good look." You know, it's just those little things. That's all.
Yeah. Quick, that's a question from the chat room. Where did you get those cool mic flags?
What I did was I cheat coded. I bought the mic flags plain off of Amazon. I think they're the Rycote, Rycote. I bought the mic flags plain off of Amazon, and I went ahead and had my logos printed on either Uprinting or Vistaprint, and just had all of my logos just printed and just made it that way.
Yep.
And I attach them to the mics that Levin and Alexis have right underneath, and that's that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty good life hack. Get the blank mic flag, so then, you know, Amazon or whomever isn't printing your order, you know, you're printing it yourself for $5 at Vistaprint, and then just sticking it on there. So that's great.
No more than $20.
Yeah. The one thing if you want to know who the average viewer is, I always tell people, go hang out when we could hang out there. Go hang out at the DMV for an hour. And, you know, that's the average viewer, right? No. So you're sitting next to, you know, the people from all walks of life. And those are the people who you're trying to reach, who you're trying to appeal to, right? So, you know, once you start getting into video production, getting into audio production, you're not the average listener anymore. You're not the average viewer anymore. So remove yourself from the process a bit if you can, and look at it with a fresh set of ears, a fresh set of eyes. And kind of see how the average viewer would see it. Alexis and Levin, your kind of, you know, your approach to seeing the work that you do the way the average consumer does.
I have a super critical eye. So
I appreciate that.
So I definitely am always looking to see you know, I don't like
What's
to see
wrong?
things that I don't like, you know, like right away, I always notice like, oh, I see this, you know, their mic is hanging off here, or, you know, I see all the details. So like, I'm quick to look at all that stuff. So I'm very critical. It's hard for me.
I think that's a trait of people that work in production, is you're going to be as an editor, you're going to be very critical. So it's hard to turn that off. But at the same time, I think that's important. If you're working on your own content, is to always take constructive criticisms, obviously number one, and not take it personally. There's you know, you're never going to, you know, make it perfect. So you always have to try and understand that people are trying to help you. And like with her, she'll always tell me everything that's wrong, you know, before it's just like, oh, it's okay, you know. So I think that helps you grow as a producer.
Yeah. And definitely, yeah, just getting the feedback. Like I know I have one of my good friends is doing a video podcast thing, and I told her right away when she put it up. She's like, "So what did you think?" And I was like, "Oh, no,
It's all wrong.
it's really bad. This is the stuff you did right, which was really great. But these are the things that you can do to make it better." And right away, she took those things and she set up her background better. She gave it distance. She did a whole different thing, and it made a really big difference. So just, asking people, talking to other people also, you know, get feedback.
Right.
There's a reason why the well-produced TV shows and well-produced movies cost a lot of money to make, right? Because it takes a lot of time and effort. You know, to your point, it takes, you know, a lot of time and effort just to do it right, and
Right.
you know, and to make sure that it looks the way that the client, the person who's paying the money, the producers, whomever, want to make it look right. So, all right. So, Chuck, in the couple minutes that we have left, kind of your final encouraging thoughts about adding video to the mix if you have a podcast.
Obviously, it's been polarizing today, but I will tell everybody that it's all about being fearless. Everything can work. You can make things work with little resources. You can make things work with little team. I think that the thing that myself, Levin, and Alexis, and yourself, Brian, as well, just really bringing up was just making sure that you know that when you are putting something together to release on a video platform, this represents your brand. That's it, you know, and just like how you turn to look at a show and you have a certain way, a certain level that you want to see things, that's usually what you're going to be tasked with people looking at your product. That's all. But otherwise, video is king, content is king, and you can never go wrong no matter what. Be fearless.
Yeah. That's really, really great advice. If you feel like you want to take the leap and learn on the way. Just be super careful. Understand what you're getting into. You know, do your due diligence, but definitely take the leap. Alexis, your last thoughts about adding video to the mix?
I love video, so I think video is always great. Everyone can, you know, you can always learn. It's just about how much work you actually want to put in. So if you're devoted and you want to put in the work, of course you can learn. Everyone can learn. And also I think it's important to also, use your resources, build a team, which is always important, as well for building your brand. And also, sometimes it's not a bad thing to like start small and like try doing like the Instagram type stuff, the social stuff, and then build from there, because audience is important. So you want to make sure that you're really engaging and getting that audience.
Levin?
Yeah, I think the same things that we all love about podcasts in general, audio podcasts, traditional podcasts, and then video, adding video, is that you get to really dive into a story and how you can you can create a world. You can really, you know, make each session, you have a different guest. You're creating a whole experience for the viewer, the listener. So then I think just challenging yourself and your audience, your guests, to think about how you can add to that visually. Starting from any point. So really, we want to encourage everybody to just dive in, and you're going to get better. If you're passionate about this, if you're here, then you're obviously passionate about it, and you're probably going to enjoy it, and then you're going to get better quickly. And the resources are only getting easier, everything's getting cheaper, and there's so many people that want to help, including ourselves. We're here to help.
Yeah,
saw
ask questions.
Right. I saw that the question about the light. That's a strobe. The blue light is Monoprice has a lot of great production gear. Monoprice, and that's just a strobe light that you can change the colors on.
Yeah. There's a quick question about microphones. Does it make sense if you are switching to video to maybe switch to a lavalier microphone as opposed to the blue microphones that you guys got, or whatever you've been using for your podcast? Do you guys have any thoughts about microphones if you're making the
Well, if you want it to visually, if you want it to be like a pod, like looking like the podcast.
Well, I would say if you're asking about a lav, then it makes me think you're on the move, like you're mobile. So there's a reason. If you're going to be in a studio, I'd use a condenser mic like this, which take phantom power, which this is powering, which is going to give you a better sound, a cleaner sound for the voice. All other elements removed. Than if you have a lav mic, would be more if you're mobile, I would say. But I would say I would go for a condenser if you're comparing one to the other for a podcast.
Yeah.
And it creates the environment for a podcast setup. People.
Yeah, things the mic gets hit. There's always a problem.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and is it? It does kind of go back to our question: is it a podcast with a video element, or is it a TV show?
TV show, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So real quick, Levin and Alexis, people have questions for you. Where can they find you?
In Charlotte.
Yeah, info@charlottestarroom.com. We're here. We're doing things safely in the studio on a small time, personal basis. If people need help, that was always something that we wanted to do here, was to do what this entire program has been doing, which is to lower the barrier to entry and help people out, not be afraid to ask questions. So just hit us up online, and also we're in this.
We're in South Park,
the shopping center, Harris Teeter, Mugs, Portofino's, if you know it, on Park Road. We're here, so you can hit us up, come by, say hi.
Yeah.
Awesome. Alexis and Levin, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. Great information. We appreciate the effort you put into setting up your setup and your very real look at what it takes to add video to the mix. So thanks a lot for your time, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chuck Holliday, where can people find you if they've got questions?
Let's see. I'm all over social media, Chuck Holliday, and that's with 2 L's. I'm pretty much on social throughout. I have no problem answering questions. As far as my video work, sweet929.tv, and that's SUITE 929.tv. The number is 929.tv. That's where a lot of my video work is these days, and some of the video podcasts I produce as well are over there. So, yeah. But feel free to hit me up. Not a problem. I want to help everybody. I want to see everybody do good.
All right, that's perfect. Chuck, thank you so much for your perspective, for your truth. I think we kept it 100. So thanks for, that's what the kids say, right? These days.
Hopefully it wasn't too polarizing.
Yeah. But thanks a lot, Chuck. We appreciate your time and
thank you.
Your perspective. And, we thank you guys for hanging out with us tonight. I know some people may feel discouraged about adding video to the mix. That wasn't our intent, but we want to make sure that you have a very real sense of what it takes to add a video to the mix. If you just want to prop up your iPhone and record it, that's fantastic. You should do that. If you want to get, spend a little bit of money and get a multi-camera system for your podcast studio with a big set, you should absolutely do that. We just wanted to provide a very real sense of what it takes to add a video to your podcast. So I hope you accepted the information you took today in the spirit in which it was intended. If you want to reach me at the Queen City Podcast Network, you can find me at hello@queencitypodcastnetwork.com. That would be the email address if you have any more questions. Again, I want to thank you guys for hanging out tonight. This is Charlotte's first podcast festival, the Charlotte Podcast Fest, presented by WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the Queen City Podcast Network, Blumenthal Performing Arts, and Eclecs Creative Agency. All kinds of more events and conversations and great information coming up all through the month of October, Monday through Friday. Check out the schedule at charlottepodcastfestival.com. If you talk about us on social media, use the hashtag CLT Podcast Fest. CLT Podcast Fest. Also, pick up a T-shirt while you're at charlottepodcastfestival.com. You can register for all the events there. You have to register by 12:01 the day of the event in order to reserve your seat. Thanks again for hanging out with us, everyone. We appreciate it. We will see you guys at tomorrow's sessions. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Bye, everyone.